His son is being investigated by his Justice Department. That's not a conflict of interest that wouldn't require a special counsel? Of course it does. And the fact that one hasn't been appointed highlights the corruption of the Justice Department, that they have one set of rules. It's not even a different set of rules. They're actually being consistent, which is they only go after their enemies and they protect their friends. First up, big news about the Hunter Biden laptop. It may not be new news to you, especially if you've been following Judicial Watch or the New York Post or our friend John Solomon or Miranda Devine, who has a book out about the Hunter Biden laptop and the associated scandals. But finally, the New York Times has deemed to acknowledge, 17 months after it was first reported by the New York Post, that there are these emails that are the subject of Justice Department investigation concerning Hunter Biden and his dealings abroad. And the emails implicate, it looks like to me, and to pretty much anyone else who's looked at this, his father in this, what I would call a RICO scheme, a racketeering operation to use the president's office, or at the time, the vice president's office, to bring in cash to the Biden family machine. Now, the New York Times pretended these emails haven't existed until this report came out just this week. Hunter Biden paid tax bill, but broad federal investigation continues. Now, remember, if you were talking about these emails in October, if you had highlighted this New York Post story, you had Twitter they suspended the account of the New York Post. You had other big tech try to pretend that this story was not valid and censored millions of Americans, including yours truly, who were trying to get the truth out about this. And of course, the big media was trying to poo-poo this investigation, this story. They were trying to protect Joe Biden. And it's not surprising Democrats would try to minimize this. And I don't necessarily blame them for trying to minimize it, but they all knew otherwise. You know, it's one thing to say, well, you know, I don't believe this. It's another thing to say, to know that that what is being alleged is likely true, or you know it to be true, and then lie about it, which is which is exactly what the Biden campaign did, and people like Adam Schiff did. So you had this massive censorship designed to protect Joe Biden's candidacy for the presidency. Now, if that's not election interference, I don't know what is. I mean, that's how you rig an election in plain sight. Don't you agree? And so the New York Times, a day late and a dollar short, has finally admitted these emails exist. This is the key part of the story, at least in terms of that regard. People familiar with the investigation, so the Justice Department has been sitting on this since at least December of 2019. They had the emails back then, or the laptop back then. There was a tax investigation, according to the New York Times report, that began under the Obama administration into what Hunter was up to. And now supposedly it's a criminal investigation, the longest criminal investigation in the history of man. I say that sarcastically, but it's obviously being stretched out, in my view, to protect Joe. People familiar with the investigation said prosecutors had examined emails between Mr. Biden, Mr. Archer. Archer was one of Hunter's business partners and evidently was in business with Joe Biden, and others about Burisma. Where's Burisma in Ukraine? And other foreign business activity. Those emails were obtained by the New York Times from a cache of files that appears to have come from a laptop abandoned by Mr. Biden in a Delaware repair shop. The emails and others in the cache were authenticated by people familiar with them and with the investigation. So if I had read this in October 2020, this video would have been deleted. Twitter would have banned me. YouTube would have prohibited it from being distributed, probably take the video down. Same on Facebook. And I would have been accused by fact checkers, the liberal enforcement squad, of putting out disinformation. So finally, the New York Times admits the truth. And of course, there's a lot of interest in that because they're finally admitting it after Joe Biden wins the election. And the question is, why is it coming out now? And I'm reading a story, and I think it's coming out now because there's this effort to derail any criminal prosecution of Hunter Biden, because I think a criminal prosecution of Hunter Biden necessarily implicates Joe Biden. The investigation, as I said, began as a tax inquiry under the Obama administration, so they've been looking at Hunter forever and a day. And it includes possible criminal violations of laws now, tax laws, as well as foreign lobbying and money laundering rules. I would add bribery based on the information that I've seen. Now, what's going on is the Justice Department is thinking of ways. Remember, the Justice Department is controlled by the deep state. And I say that as a shorthand for liberal activists who hate Donald Trump, are largely Democrat in orientation, and don't want to enforce the rule of law against their political allies. That's the Justice Department. Now, does it mean everyone in the Justice Department's like that? Of course not. But that's generally the way the Justice Department operates. Hence this leak. Hence the Justice Department saying that they may have trouble proving Biden intentionally violated the Foreign Agents Registration Act, which requires disclosure to the Justice Department. And so their thinking is that maybe they'll just go for a civil penalty for Biden's failure to follow these foreign agent registration requirements. Who was he a foreign agent for? They're kind of vague on that, aren't they? It's Burisma, it's Ukraine, it's China perhaps. And the outrage is now they're back, according to the New York Times, to suggesting that this foreign agents registration law, which up until the Trump administration had almost always been the subject of civil enforcement only, meaning you had to file the form if you hadn't filed it. And that was the end of it. Maybe you paid a fine or just fixed it that way. But when Trump came to town and Trump was running, they used it to prosecute people criminally. That's what they tried to falsely accuse General Flynn of violating. Yeah, I know. Flynn admitted to criminal violations of law related to FARA, but he withdrew that plea, so he hasn't admitted to anything under the law. They went after Manafort, I think, if I recall correctly, for violating that law criminally. And they hadn't really done any criminal prosecutions under that law until Trump came to town. Now they're going to revert back to the norm to protect Hunter and Joe. But, maybe they'll do something more substantial. And there's another organization or entity tied to Hunter Biden, Blue Star Strategies, that Judicial Watch has highlighted in some of the documents we've uncovered as pushing for Burisma here in the United States, trying to get, I think it was a meeting with, or suggesting they could get a meeting with Hillary Clinton. So there was even a Clinton corruption angle to this Ukraine scandal involving Hunter Biden and Joe Biden. We've got the documents on that. And the other disclosure the Times makes, because a lot of what the Times talks about in the emails have been reported elsewhere. But the news in this story that hasn't been reported elsewhere is that Hunter Biden last year paid off $1 million tax bill. It's not clear where he got the money. I thought he had no money. And the thinking is he paid that off so it would be harder for prosecutors to make the case that he committed a crime in failing, hiding income or failing to file taxes. Now, typically that's not, that doesn't necessarily mean that you won't get prosecuted, but that's the angle they're playing here. And again, to me, it's prepping the battle space to justify not prosecuting Hunter Biden for any criminal activity. The prosecutors, but this is more interesting because this is the money laundering and some of the underlying criminal activity that is tied to the tax issue. Prosecutors had investigated payments and gifts Biden or his associates had received from foreign interests, including a vehicle paid for by using funds from a company associated with a Kazakh oligarch, Kazakhstan, a diamond from a Chicago energy tycoon, and prosecutors also saw documents related to corporate entities through which Mr. Biden and his associates conducted business with interests around the world. And then the story goes into the debate they had about whether this Foreign Agents Registration Act would be something they could prosecute. But the emails that the New York Times has, quote, authenticated, I'm not quite sure how they, quote, authenticated it. I'd be interested to know because it looks to me like Biden's lawyers probably leaked some of this stuff. Did Biden's lawyers authenticate it for him? For the New York Times? And if so, how does that compare with what both Joe Biden and Hunter Biden have said about this laptop, where they've disavowed it largely? So there's an email in April of 2014 where Hunter Biden outlined his vision for working with Burisma, again, this Ukraine company that was Russia-friendly. In the email, Hunter indicated that the forthcoming announcement of a trip to Ukraine by Vice President Biden, who's referred to in the email as my guy, the big guy is in different notes that were released subsequently, should be characterized as part of our advice and thinking, but what he will say and do is out of our hands. So here you have them at least trying to leverage Joe Biden's trip to Ukraine for their business interests. He suggested enlisting a law firm where he worked at the time to help Burisma through direct discussions at State Energy and NSC. So you have Hunter Biden wanting to lobby the Biden White House on behalf of this Ukrainian company. This is what the emails show, according to the New York Times. So, if you've been watching me the last few weeks, I've been talking to you about how this Ukraine scandal that Biden has been in undermines our national security. These emails, further confirmed by the New York Times, highlight this. There's no doubt Biden is implicated here. They've basically confirmed previously reported stories. I think John Solomon first reported the story, that Biden likely attended a meeting while he was vice president with a Burisma official while he was here in Washington, D.C. So I tell you, this is the worst, when I say it's the worst scandal in American history, what I'm saying is that you had President Trump, then candidate Trump, spied on and maligned and smeared by the Obama gang about Russia. You had a Ukraine angle being used against him as well. By the Clinton gang working with the Obama gang, while they knew that Biden was corrupt, literally through his family's dealings in China and elsewhere, and Ukraine and Kazakhstan, for instance, And Trump starts asking questions about it once he's president of Ukraine. And what do? They try to impeach him for highlighting the corruption and seeking accountability for what went on there. And we have the Justice Department knowing, at least since 2019, if not sooner, that Hunter Biden was likely engaged in criminal activity. And now we're almost a year and a half into the Biden presidency. There's been a criminal investigation going on in the Justice Department out of the Delaware U.S. Attorney's Office. And supposedly it's a U.S. attorney up there who's been there during Bush and Obama and Trump nominated him. And that's supposed to reassure us that that's going to be an investigation free of conflict of interest. Having the home state prosecutors in Delaware investigate Joe, or Hunter in this regard, I don't buy that. The special counsel regulations of the Justice Department require a special counsel be appointed. I objected to a special counsel being appointed for President Trump. Here, his son is being investigated by his Justice Department. That's not a conflict of interest that wouldn't require a special counsel? Of course it does. And the fact that one hasn't been appointed highlights the corruption of the Justice Department, that they have one set of rules. It's not even a different set of rules. They're actually being consistent, which is they only go after their enemies and they protect their friends. I joked on Twitter, you see Jussie Smollett was released from prison this week outrageously. People are complaining about it. And I said, you know, if you think he's getting treated with kid gloves, wait till you see how Hunter Biden and Joe Biden have been treated. There needs to be a special counsel. And in the meantime, Judicial Watch is going to continue its independent investigations. I mean, we highlighted, as I've discussed, how the Burisma had Hillary Clinton's campaign in its sights. We highlighted how the Obama State Department knew that there was a corruption issue for Joe Biden that Russia was taking advantage of and arguably interfering with our foreign affairs. Now, do you think that's gotten worse or better since Biden has become president? I think the war in Ukraine tells you it became worse, because it's long been my view that Putin has Biden's number because of these corruption stories. So the big news is, again, New York Times confirms material about the Hunter Biden laptop that implicates Joe Biden in criminal activity. The Justice Department doesn't evidently want to do much or is afraid to do anything. So they're setting up, a slap on the wrist for Hunter while protecting Joe. And one way, at least to better ensure justice, although it's no guarantee, is to make sure that there's a special counsel appointed that can't be as controlled directly by the deep state Justice Department. Now, again, I don't want to overstate whether that will mean justice will be done, but under this current rubric, it certainly ain't going to get done. And certainly there's enough here to begin an impeachment inquiry of Joe Biden, don't you think? Why not? Trump was impeached for asking questions about Biden's corruption. We have evidence of Biden's corruption, enough to warrant an impeachment inquiry, in the least. You got a lot of people running for office right now this year. Why don't you ask them questions about whether they support impeachment of Joe Biden, or even want to think about it? There's got to be accountability, and Judicial Watch has litigation to try to get accountability here. I mean, we even did simple, basic investigative work, like uncovering that Hunter Biden had Secret Service protection. Actually, we asked the Secret Service for Hunter Biden's travel records, because we knew Secret Service was protecting Hunter while Vice President Biden was vice president. That's appropriate. There's nothing illegal about that happening. But it gives you an idea, but because we can ask about where the Secret Service was going, we can figure out where Hunter was going. And he had trips to 29 different countries, including a trip to Russia, including 5 trips to China. And that was only the first 5.5 years of the Obama administrations, because then Hunter ditched the Secret Service and he didn't have any records anymore. All that was uncovered by Judicial Watch. So we're doing this basic legwork that the New York Times refused to do. I mean, there's still nothing in the New York Times about 10% for the big guy. The big guy obviously being Joe Biden, right? So we're going to continue pushing separately and independently. And as the war in Ukraine shows, this corruption has a national security implication beyond measure.
Thanks for tuning in. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to catch all the latest news from Judicial Watch.